Let us study about the actual concept of this lesson, how do organisms reproduce. So in this lesson you learned about the definition of reproduction. To tell you once again, reproduction is the process of producing new organism, so where it resembles its parental organism. So here we are learning two types of reproduction methods, asexual method of reproduction and sexual method of reproduction. So here we are studying different types of asexual reproductory methods. So asexual reproduction involves no fusion or union of the gametes. The female gamete fuses with the male gamete to result in a new organism. But in primitive organisms like unicellular organisms, so we find asexual method of reproduction involving only one species. Here such example we can see in amoeba, leishmania, plasmodium. So where we can see the fission, so which is considered as binary fission. So this takes place in unicellular organisms where cell divides into two equal halves, which leads to the creation of new individuals. So in amoeba, splitting of two cells during division can take place in any plane. See, one amoeba split into two cells and the division can occur in any plane. So in any plane we can see the splitting of the cell. But in other organisms like leishmania, let us see what happens. So in leishmania, which causes a disease called Kala-Azar, binary fission occurs in a definite orientation in relation to the body structure of that leishmania. So in leishmania, you are seeing a different pattern of binary fission. So where a single cell, so upon the splitting in a particular plane or orientation, splitting into two leishmania cells. Here you are seeing a whip-like structure and a nucleus. So this whip-like structure called flagella is divided into two, and the nucleus also split into two parts. And here you can see the fission taking place at a particular plane or orientation, resulting in two leishmania cells. So in amoeba and leishmania, we observe binary fission where different patterns are observed in both of them. Whereas here in this plasmodium, which is again a protozoan, you are seeing a fission which is called multiple fission. So here this cell is having many cells inside that. A single cell splits into many cells where number of daughter cells are seen here. So by bursting, it releases all the daughter cells outside, resulting in the spreading of the disease. So this multiple fission is seen in organisms like Plasmodium vivax, which causes malarial disease. Second type of asexual reproduction is called fragmentation, which is seen in the organism like Spirogyra. Let us learn the second method of asexual reproduction, that is called fragmentation, which is seen in organism like Spirogyra, which is a algae. So this Spirogyra is a multicellular organism, whereas we see a unicellular organisms like amoeba, leishmania and plasmodium in the earlier method, that is in binary fission or in multiple fission. So those were unicellular organisms and their reproduction was taking place upon cell division. So here in the multicellular organism, so we find a number of cells. Here the reproduction may not take place cell by cell. Here the reproduction takes place consisting of the whole body. So where the body of this organism, when it is cut into smaller pieces, so it develops into a new individual. So Spirogyra is a multicellular organism having a simple body organization. So body of organism simply breaks up into smaller pieces upon maturation. Here the cell inside this organism has to grow fully. So upon maturation, so it gets fragmented, so cut into pieces to develop into new individuals. There must be a single cell type in the organism that is capable of growing, proliferating and making other cell types under right circumstances. So what happens? So when a body of this Pyrogera is cut, so how can it develop into a new individual? So if you take some of the filaments in the pond water, so when you take some of the filaments of Spirogera in the pond water and you take 1 or 2 drops of that water and observe under the microscope, you see that those filaments will be consisting of some of the specialized tissues inside. So those tissues may consist of 1 or 2 cells which are specialized to undergo reproduction. So whenever body of this Pyrogera is cut, so those special cells found in the tissues, so they develop into a new organism. Here that is what they are saying, there must be a single cell type in the organism that is capable of growing, proliferating and making other cell types under right circumstances. So this fragmentation is another type of asexual method we are learning. So we saw that process in the multicellular organism like Spirogera. The third type of asexual reproduction method involves regeneration, which is seen in the animals like Hydra and Planaria. Here these are fully differentiated organisms. So these organisms have got the ability to reproduce by a method called regeneration, where the body of organism accidentally cut into many pieces, so each cut piece forms into new individuals. So here you can see the 3 pieces being formed separately into 3 new individuals. So what is the specialty present in these parts so that they become new individuals? Here these body parts, when they are cut, they have got some of the specialized cells in that. So those specialized cells have got the ability to undergo cell division. So they become proliferated to form a mass of cells. So these mass of cells undergo differentiation to form various cell types and tissues. So those tissues, with the help of that, so the new organisms are developed. So this is not actually a method of reproduction. So regeneration is the method seen here. So here these type of organisms naturally do not depend on being always cut into many pieces so that they have got the ability to reproduce. We are learning 4th type of asexual method called budding, which is taking place in Hydra. Organisms such as Hydra use regenerative cells for reproduction in the process of budding. In Hydra, a bud develops. Here you can see the development of the bud. The bud develops as an outgrowth due to repeated cell division at one specific site. These buds develop into tiny individuals and then fully mature, detach from the parental body and become new independent individuals. You can see a newly born individual here, which is there in the form of a bud earlier. So it detaches from the parental body and develops into a new individual. The 5th method of asexual reproduction involves vegetative propagation, which is having the example of leaf of bryophyllum. The 6th method of asexual reproduction involves spore formation, where it is having the example of rhizopus or bread mold. You can see another asexual method of reproduction called vegetative propagation. Here this is seen in plants. So here the parts of the plants like stem, root or leaves is developed into new plants under appropriate conditions. So here we are seeing some of the examples like sugarcane, roses, grapes, where certain methods of vegetative propagation like layering and grafting can be done, and these plants can be developed for various agricultural purposes. So we know that plants can be obtained with the help of seeds, but plants can also be obtained with the help of this root, stem and leaf parts. So here we see plants obtained from seeds, they bear the flowers and fruits. So like them, the plants which are propagated with the help of this vegetative propagation, they also bear the flowers and fruits. So the plants obtained here are genetically similar to their parental plants, where they show all the characteristics of those parental plants. Here some of the plants like banana, orange, rose, jasmine, which have lost the capacity to produce seeds, can also be developed with the help of this vegetative propagative method. So here in your textbook they have given certain activities with these plants, money plant and potato. You take a potato with several eyes or notches on that. You take or cut the pieces of those potato having those eyes and keep on the moist soil or cloth. And you also place some of the potato pieces which are not having the eye. So after several days you can observe that the potato pieces having the eyes has developed the shoot and root system. Similarly, when you take the money plant and you take a part of the money plant with a leaf and you take the part of the money plant, in between two leaves, both these are kept in the water, and you can notice that later, the part of the plant which is having the leaf has developed into a new plant with a nicely grown shoot system. So here you can see the leaf of bryophyllum with buds. So these buds, when they fall on the moist soil, they develop into new plants. So one such vegetative propagation is seen here in the example bryophyllum, where the part of the leaf is used for the vegetative propagation. Tissue culture is one method given in your textbook, telling about the growth of the plants with the help of its parts. So like that of the vegetative propagation, any part of the plant can be taken to develop that plant into a new one. So here this tissue culture is an advanced technology in agricultural science, where a group of cells or tissue is taken from a plant. So this is kept inside the nutritive medium consisting of hormone. So the part of the plant, for example leaf, it will be kept inside that nutritive medium. So it develops into a tissue which is considered as callus. So this callus develops into a new plant. So this seedling, which is said to be a new plant, when it is kept on the moist soil, develops into a new plant. So it grows in a faster manner. So it is free from all the types of diseases. So most of the ornamental plants are propagated or developed with the help of this tissue culture method. So the last asexual method of reproduction is involving the spore formation in the fungal organisms, for example in bread mold or rhizopus. You are seeing this method of reproduction, that is spore formation. So when you keep a piece of bread which is moist and kept in the dark for a long time, it develops certain thread-like structures. So when you observe those thread-like structures under microscope, you will see an organism like this. So it is nothing but bread mold or rhizopus. Here you can see the thread-like structures which are called hypha or hyphae. So these hyphae are not actually the reproductive structures. You are seeing at the tip of the hyphae a blob-like structures. So these round structures are called sporangia. So these consist of innumerable number of spores in that. See, these spores have got thick wall. So after they come in contact with the water medium, so they germinate and develop into a new organism. So after learning several methods of asexual reproduction, let us study about the sexual reproduction. The sexual reproduction is the one which is seen in all higher organisms including plants and animals. So where there is a involvement of fusion between male gamete and female gametes. See, all the higher plants and animals have the special reproductory structures in them which produces male gametes and female gametes. Here in plants, so the male reproductory part involves the stamen and female reproductory part involves the carpel, where the gametes you can see are pollen and ovules. In case of animals, reproductory structures such as testis and ovary produces the male gamete called sperm and female gamete called egg. So we learned already that about the different types of cell divisions. So namely mitosis and meiosis. So mitosis takes place in body cells, whereas meiosis takes place in reproductory cells. So in this method of cell division, we learned that a cell divides into two. So where you can see the transfer of genetic material which is same as that of the parental cell. So you saw that type of cell division in case of mitosis. So where there is a transfer of genetic material in its equal amount. So all the lower organisms, so whatever we studied, the asexual methods of reproduction involves a simple method of mitotic cell division. So where there is no involvement of male or female gametes fusion. Here a species having a certain specialized cells, so it undergo asexual method of reproduction and it continues its progeny. Whereas in higher animals like plants and animals, so along with the mitosis, meiosis is specially seen in the reproductory structures which is having specialized cells for them. So here there is a cell division involving 2n number of chromosomes. So the chromosomes which are in two sets, one set from the male and another set from female, so get united to form 2n number of chromosomes. So when this cell divides to form 4 daughter cells, so here each daughter cell will be having half the amount of the genetic material when compared to that of the parental cell. Here these 4 daughter cells are considered as gametes. So a male gamete having the n number of chromosomes and female gamete having the n number of chromosomes. So when they get fused, so it retains the original amount of genetic material. So a DNA will be regulating all the characters of an organism. So half the amount of chromosomes from each parent, so re-establishes all the characters of an organism. See, in this meiotic cell division, so if the number of chromosomes are same as that of the parental cells, so it would result in drastic changes in characteristics of an organism. So this is very essential need of sexual reproduction. So in any sexual reproduction, so there is the involvement of meiotic cell division. So we also learned that DNA replication is very important, so which results in variations in any organism. So in lower organisms, as there is no meiotic cell division, no exchange of the chromosomes, so we cannot find any changes in the organism as new organisms are born from the pre-existing cell. But here in the meiotic cell division, which involves the higher plants and animals, we find variations in the genetic material. So when there is a DNA replication, we learned that a these variations occurring in the higher animals, so they help in the changing of certain characters which help them in adapting to the varying environmental conditions. So sexual reproduction is having advantage over the asexual reproduction. So to know in detail about the sexual mode of reproduction, it is very important to know the prior knowledge of these cell division types and the DNA replication. So we learned that in DNA replication, variations occur. So in lower organisms, so there are very less chances of the variations in the DNA while the DNA is undergoing replication. So we cannot find any drastic changes in the cellular apparatus of the lower organisms like bacteria or fungi. So when we come to the higher organisms, so which is having a complicated nature of the body design, so it involves the DNA replication. Here there is a involvement of the union of male and female gametes. So here then while DNA is undergoing replication, so there are more chances of the variations in that DNA replication. So if these changes in the variations are in a slight manner, so it is beneficial for the organisms to have some more or new characters. If the changes in the DNA replication are in a slight manner, so it helps the organisms to develop new characters which help it to adapt to the varying nature of the climatic conditions. Whereas the DNA replication has got drastic changes. When we see if the variations in the DNA replication are drastic, so in much quantity, so then it will be messing up all the characters of the organisms. So we also learned that, so during the two types of cell divisions, so in mitosis, you can see the lower organisms having that type of cell division while they are undergoing reproduction. So in mitotic cell division, there are no differences between the cells. So as we saw the example in rhizopus, so the asexual reproduction takes place with the help of spores. So there is no much differentiation in the appearance of those spores. When we come to study about the sexual reproduction in higher plants and animals, so we can see greater differences in the cells which involve in the cell division. So we have the meiotic cell division, so where there is a formation of gametes. So these gametes look somewhat dissimilar. So the pollen is different from the ovule and sperm is different from the egg. We can see the sperm having very motile nature. So it will be swimming in the semen, whereas the egg, it will be fixed in the ovary. So the motile sperm has to enter into the egg, so where the fusion of the nucleus takes place. So these are some of the things we can notice in the changes happening during the two types of cell divisions and in the DNA replication. So to see the difference between asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction, we say that sexual reproduction has got more advantages over this asexual reproduction. So in both asexual and sexual reproduction, so there are variations, but the variations occurring during DNA replication are said to be slower in asexual reproduction. So when compared to the variations taking place in sexual reproduction. Here you can see a cell which is undergoing asexual reproduction. Suppose this is bacteria. So bacteria undergoes a binary fission forming two cells. Here the bacteria will be containing so many variations in it, but when it replicates or reproduces, it forms two cells. Here you can see cells are similar to the parent cell, but the little variation you can find in the DNA is very negligible. But in the sexual reproduction, when one cell undergoes division to form two cells. So these are considered as gametes. So these gametes having n number of chromosomes. So here 2n number of chromosomes get divided to form haploid cells, where 4 cells are formed. So when we consider these two as male and female gametes. So this is male gamete, so this is female gamete. So in these two cells, so there will be so many variations you can see. So variations will be so many. But here the variations are different from that of this cell. So you can find more number of blue colored DNA. Here you can see more number of red colored DNA. So when these get united, so in the sexual mode of reproduction, so female gamete unites with the female gamete to produce another cell. So another cell having 2n number of chromosomes. So where you can see the union of both the DNA. So here, so DNA will be having mixture of the DNA from the parents. So the male gamete having this red colored DNA, female gamete having blue colored DNA, but very less number of blue color here, less number of red color here. So both get united to form the progeny or the offspring. Here the mixture of both DNA can be seen in the offspring. So the offspring neither resembles the male or female, but it will be looking like both of them. So this type of variation which is occurring in sexual mode of reproduction is said to be very faster, whereas in asexual reproduction, which occurs in bacteria, the variations occurring are said to be very slow, as you can find very little amount of variations. So like this we can say sexual reproduction is more advantageous when we consider asexual reproduction. Here the variations occurring in sexual reproduction leads to changes in the characters of the organisms, which help the organisms to adapt to varying weather conditions or climatic conditions on the earth.
When we think of why there is a need for sexual type of reproduction, we have to make a comparison between asexual reproduction with that of the sexual reproduction. So let us first learn the advantages of asexual reproduction. So in asexual reproduction, the organism does not have to depend on another organism for carrying out reproduction because a single parent is needed. It takes less time than the sexual reproduction, and hence more number of offspring can be produced in shorter time. The offspring are exact clones of their parent. Desirable characteristics can be easily incorporated into plants with artificial vegetative propagation. Let us see what are the disadvantages of asexual reproduction. So in asexual reproduction, single parent is involved, so there is negligible chance of variation. In most of the cases, in simple organisms, the parent generation ceases to exist after asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction cannot give rise to biodiversity, which is important for a healthy ecosystem. So what are the advantages of sexual reproduction and their variations? Sexual reproduction involves two parents and gamete formation. Gametes are special cells which are formed after meiosis. There are two types of gametes, namely male and female gametes. The number of chromosomes is haploid in the gametes. When the gametes fuse during fertilization, the number of chromosomes become diploid. This is important for maintaining the unique identity of a particular species which reproduces by sexual method. In sexual reproduction, the offspring gets sets of genes from two different individuals. This leads to subtle variation through subsequent generations. These variations accumulate over thousands of generations and finally may give rise to new species. That is how all complex organisms have evolved from a common ancestor. So let us once again revise what happens during DNA replication. DNA replication is the process by which DNA makes a copy of itself. DNA replication happens during S phase of the cell cycle. This is important because the daughter cells would need additional copies of the DNA. The process of DNA replication is a foolproof process, yet some alterations do take place. These alterations may lead to some variations in the characters of the daughter cells.
Sexual reproduction in flowering plants includes the diagram longitudinal section of flower. You are seeing the parts of the flower: stigma, style, ovary consisting of pistil, anther, filament, petal consisting of stamen. Along with that you have petal and sepal. Here enlarged part of the flower consists of this ovary part, so which is the germination of pollen on stigma. So the stigma consisting of pollen grain. So you can see the male germ cell inside the pollen tube. Ovary consisting of female germ cell inside that. After learning various asexual reproduction methods, let us learn sexual reproduction in flowering plants. So flowering plants are also called as angiosperms. Here you are seeing the diagram of the flower. So it shows a typical flower. The parts of the typical flowers are like this. So it is having stigma, style and ovary. Stigma, style and ovary, which constitute the female part of the flower, which is called pistil. Here you are seeing anther, filament. So these two consist of the male reproductory part of the flower called stamen. Here you are seeing petal and sepal. So this is the female reproductory part of the flower. So which consists of stigma, which is sticky in nature, so which is elongated to form the style. So at the base you have the ovary, which consists of ovules inside that. So it is the inner wall of the flower. So after that you have the stamen, so which is having anther. So anther has got numerous amount of pollens inside that. These pollen grains so burst out. So comes outside when the fully gets developed. Anther gets fully developed, so it gets burst out and you can see the yellow colored powder when you touch the flowers. So it is having the filament which is attached to the base of the flower. So this makes the second whorl of the flower. So coming to the third whorl of the flower, so it consists of colorful petals. So these petals help in attracting the insects which help in the pollination. So outermost whorl consists of sepals. So sepals are the one which protects the flower. So here the female part so receives the pollens from the anther part. So anther, so after bursting out, releases the pollens. So the pollen from the same flower it transfers female gamete is considered as the ovule. Here we are seeing male germ cell, here female germ cell getting united. So after the fertilization, so there will be formation of the zygote. When you see the enlarged view of the ovary, you are seeing the transfer of pollen here on the stigma part. You can see the landing of two pollens here. So the pollen consists of the male germ cell inside it. So the nucleus enters through the pollen tube and reaches through the micropyle and enters and unites with the female germ cell. So here inside the ovary, so there will be so many female germ cells. So one of them will fuse with the male germ cell. So this results in fertilization. So fertilization is the process where male germ cell unites with the female germ cell. So after fertilization, the zygote have repeated cell division and forms the embryo. So this embryo is considered as the seed. So the seed develops a tough coat. The ovary develops rapidly and becomes the fruit. As soon as this ovary part becomes swollen, the petal, sepal, stamens part will be withered away from the flower. So here you can see the seed formation. So in the seed you have two cotyledons. Here this cotyledon is having rich store of food. So when this seed is germinated, so when any seed is placed on the moist soil, it gets germinated. So here you can see the parts of the germinating seed. This is plumule or future root, which is growing upside, and the part which grows towards the soil or earth is called radicle, which is considered as future root.
So let us look at the sexual reproduction in plants by seeing this animation video. We will learn how sexual reproduction takes place in angiosperms or flowering plants. Most of the plants see around us are angiosperms. Flowers are the most beautiful part of the plant. So flowers are considered as reproductive parts of the plant. So let us learn reproductive parts in a flower. It is called stamen, male reproductive part, carpel as the female reproductive part. Some flowers contain both male and female reproductive parts. Such flowers are called bisexual flowers. For example, tea and China rose. Some flowers possess either the male or female reproductive parts. Such flowers are called unisexual flowers. For example, corn and cucumber. Let us learn the parts stamen and carpel, which are considered as male and female parts. Stamen includes anther and filament. So anther in turn consists of numerous number of pollen grains, which are called male gametes. Carpel is the female reproductive part, so which consists of three parts: the upper stigma part, middle style, and lower basal part called ovary, which consists of ovules inside that, which are considered as female gametes. Inside that consists of female germ cell. So in the process of sexual reproduction in plants, male gamete fuses with female gamete, which is called fertilization, resulting in zygote. The male gamete pollen grain fuses with the female gamete. Here pollen has to fuse with the female gamete. So the process which is helping here is pollination. The transfer of male gamete from the stamen of a flower to the stigma part is called pollination. So if the pollen from the stamen transferred onto the stigma part of the same flower, it is called self-pollination. whereas the stamen from one flower transferred onto the stigma part of another flower is called cross-pollination. So agents of pollination may be wind, insects, or water. So pollen grain lands on the stigma part, so where pollen grain develops a pollen tube through which the male germ cell enters inside the ovary. The male germ cell fuses with ovule, which is called female germ cell. Here, after fertilization, the zygote will be formed. So after fertilization, so the zygote develops to form embryo. So embryo develops a tough coat around that which is considered as seed. So as the ovary part develops into fruit, the petals and sepals are withered away from the flower. Let us learn sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Flower is a modified leaf which bears special organs and plays the role of reproductive system in the plant. A typical flower is composed of 4 distinct whorls, namely calyx, corolla, androecium, gynoecium. Calyx means sepals, corolla means petals, androecium means stamen, gynoecium means carpel. So calyx or sepal, it is the outermost whorl of the flower. It is composed of green leaf-like structures called sepals. So corolla are petals. The second whorl of flower is called corolla. It is composed of colorful leaf-like structures. Those are called petals. Petals are colorful so that insects and birds can be attracted. To assist the flower in pollination, androecium or stamen, this is the third whorl in the flower. It is composed of stamens. Stamen is made of a slender stalk and anthers on top. Anthers produce the pollen grains. Pollen grains are the male gametes. Gynoecium or carpel, this whorl is at the center of the flower. It is composed of a swollen base called ovary. A slender style stands upright on the ovary. It has a flat top called stigma. Ovules are inside the ovary. Ovules are called female gametes. Here you are seeing the diagram of the flower, which is very important from the view of exam. So what is pollination? The pollen grains need to be transferred to the stigma so that fertilization can take place. The transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma is called pollination. If the pollen grains from the same flower or the same plant are transferred to the stigma, it is called self-pollination. If pollen grains from a different plant are transferred to the stigma, it is called cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is better from the perspective of variations. Many agents help plants in cross-pollination, example insects, animals, air, water, etc. Insects are the main pollinators for the plant kingdom. So what is fertilization? The fusion of male and female gametes is called fertilization. The product of fertilization is called zygote. Zygote undergoes several rounds of mitosis and develops into an embryo. Subsequently, the embryo develops into a new individual. So how fertilization takes place in flowering plant? The pollen, after landing at the stigma, absorb moisture and germinate. A pollen grain develops a pollen tube which penetrates through the tissue of the style and reaches the ovule. Pollen nuclei are transferred through the pollen tube. Pollen nuclei means the male germ cell. After fertilization, the zygote is formed, which finally develops into an embryo. So what changes happen in flower after fertilization? The calyx and corolla wither and fall off, and so do the stamens. The ovary turns into the fruit. The embryo turns into seed. Once the seed becomes mature, fruit dries up so that dispersal of seeds can take place. Structure of seed. A seed contains an embryo, some reserve food, and is enclosed by protective covering called seed coat. The reserve food is stored in the cotyledons. The embryo has two pointed parts. The upper part is called plumule, which gives rise to the shoot system. The lower part is called radicle, which gives rise to the root system. Cotyledons supply food when the embryo needs it during germination. Seed germination is the process by which embryo in the seed kickstarts a new life.